A good horror game is something special. It is able not just to challenge us with its gameplay or tell a good story, but to scare us, to haunt our dreams and idle thoughts, even to make us question our own perceptions of reality. In this podcast, we meet the developers of both existing popular horror titles and hotly anticipated upcoming ones to discuss how they do it, what inspires them, and all things spooky and unnerving. Welcome to Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. Hello and welcome to Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. And yet again, we have another fantastic interview with another fantastic horror developer for you. Today, we're joined by Rob McLachlan from the Chinese Room, who's talking about Still Wakes the Deep. So, hi, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, we're obviously Still Wakes the Deep, as we're talking, is kind of barreling towards release and everything else. So there's a lot to talk about there in terms of that and everything. But just before we get into the weeds of the game, just wanted to kind of start with yourself, really. Kind of like, where's, like, just if you want to introduce yourself and talk about kind of how you got into, well, I suppose games in general, but also horror specifically, because obviously that's kind of our big collective interest.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. So hello, I'm Rob McLachlan. I'm lead designer at the Chinese Room on Still Wakes the Deep. I joined the Chinese Room in 2018 when it was reborn. The first game I worked on there was called Little Orpheus, which was a lovely little side-scrolling platformer about a Russian cosmonaut who ends up falling into the center of the Earth. Before that, I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I started out in QA at Team 17, and my journey specifically for horror really started when I was at a studio called Climax, when we were lucky enough to get the license for Silent Hill Origins and Silent Hill Shadow Memories. So I worked on both those as lead level designer. Those were really great projects to work on, and a real privilege to work on as well, because it's obviously an intellectual property that not many people get to work on, and something that's very, very dear to the hearts of the horror community and myself as well. I count myself as that community. Outside of games, I've always been wonderfully interested in horror movies, not so much the gore movies, but things like everything from Kubrick to I'm just racking my brains now. Anything that takes us into a place that is that particular horror place of figuring out what the hell is going on, into the unknown. And before that as well, I used to read a lot of ghost stories and things. So yeah, when I joined the Chinese Room, I always hoped that even in that strand that went from the kind of cozy catastrophe of Rapture to the interior horror, I think, of Dear Esther, into, as well as through Machine for Pigs, I always hoped that TCR would get back to that. And it was my very great fortune that Still Wakes the Deep came along, and I was able to jump back into the abyss of horror and work on it again.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention, actually, talking about the Chinese Rooms I put, and obviously things like Everyone's Gone to the Rapture and A Machine for Pigs has been that kind of like sort of rich kind of narrative driven vein in particular, and
Completely.
that I'm assuming is everything we can expect. It's a very similar vein as far as Still Wakes the Deep is concerned.
Yeah, we really feel that Still Wakes the Deep is a kind of return to the major chord that the Chinese Room has always struck, that idea of being in a first-person experience that pushes the narrative of the experience into a place that is what we like to think really at the top level of where narrative games can be. I think we want to talk about things in the story, and have a quality of performance that we hope puts it in, world-class areas. And at the same time, carry on something that I think the Chinese room has always stood for, which is a kind of British horror, a kind of provincial horror, something about ordinary people and ordinary lives being upended by extraordinary events.
Mm. Yeah, because I that kind of comes back to what you said about not necessarily being as interested in like the gore side of things. I'm assuming, and um, again, I know a few people that kind of one of their main interests in horror is like ghost stories in particular, like you
Oh
mentioned, and
yes,
that
Mm.
it's always that kind of sense of everything's mostly normal, but there's just slight
yeah.
offness, like something just like u- uncanny, I suppose.
That terrifying note that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
Yeah.
I used to scare myself stupid reading M.R. James and other ghost story writers when I was younger. Silver very impressionable in terms of that. I was walking down a dark passageway or a dark garden, always run the last few steps and shut the
Yeah.
door behind you, so something's not going to grab you as you get through. That's always something that um, has been a big part of how I see the world. I think of wondering what's through the door, wondering what's down the dark, um, through the dark hole that you can see what's behind all that. Is it going to come out and grab me?
And you should definitely go that little bit faster up the stairs back
Oh
into the
yeah,
light just in case.
yeah. That's when they get you. You see,
Yeah.
when you're going up the stairs and the lights are off downstairs. That's their chance.
Yeah, absolutely. So what? Obviously, we've had kind of bit of a look. There's been some teaser trailers and things out, and we know in particular, again going back to that British horror, it's like set on the Scottish oil rig. What can you tell us, like in terms of for anyone who may not be familiar yet or may not have caught the trailers, kind of an introduction to what Still Wakes the Deep is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've meticulously, with our community manager's help, um, released the trailers that we hope spark interest without
Mm.
spoiling the story. We really want everyone to experience it fresh and have a wonderful experience. But it's the premise is very strong. We feel it came out of an elevator pitch, which was essentially the thing on an oil rig. So the idea that a remote facility or remote place is invaded by some underworldly horror. So in Still Wakes a Deep, you play the part of Cameron McCleary, or Kaz to his friends, who's a Glaswegian ex-boxer who's got into a bit of trouble at home and has run away to the rig to get away from his problems. But they're starting to catch up with him. And in the middle of this human drama that forms part of the beginning of the game, something extraordinary happens. Something comes aboard the rig, and the rig becomes a place which Kaz has to survive. Um, and we take the story into hopefully some extraordinary areas.
No, definitely. And I think that was the first thing that really stood out to me when I first saw about Still Wakes the Deep was obviously the setting was completely different to what we've seen before.
Yeah,
And what was the inspiration about being located on like an oil rig?
right. So um, there are many strands to that. I think that one strand is it is something that people have some knowledge about. These are structures that people have some popular knowledge about what they're like, and you often see movies of North Sea workers in the mountainous seas, um, which which I think for a lot of people may create a certain atmosphere that they expect. Um, the the main strand that inspired that is because it's close to home, because it's something a place where ordinary working people make their living. That created a very rich space for the human drama that's so important to us at the Chinese Room. So for those main reasons, for it being something that is almost domestic in its premise, but then putting it into an isolated place that is really evocative in the way that it sits above the waves, in the dark, in the storms. We felt that that was a really brilliant place to start this experience. And frankly, no one had done it before. We know we knew there's some very famous levels that in some first-person shooters has been set on oil rigs, even going back to AS oil rig on Counter-Strike, which I very much remember as one of the missions in the original, in like Counter-Strike 1.3 or constant. That was a really fun experience. But aside from Call of Duty, you have a couple of levels set on an oil rig. We felt that it was completely unique and a really interesting space. And there are certain other games that inspired us in terms of the setting.
Yeah, because an oil rig's one of those places. Again, everyone knows what they are, and you've seen movies or whatever. But
Yeah.
for the most part, like, you know, I think the amount of players who will have actually set foot on one when they're playing this game is probably going to be very low.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. We've had some social media contact with some offshore workers who've professed their profound excitement at getting to play such a game in a place that they're very familiar with. Now, we hope that our research, although it's been focused very much on the 1970s, the very frontier of the beginning of this sort of North Sea oil rush. Obviously, things were different then. There wasn't so much health and safety. It was a much more dangerous place. And although they were very safety conscious and the safety record was very good, it was a much more perilous place to work, and things were a bit more rough and ruddy. And we use that to establish the culture of the people on the rig in interesting ways that we make them very earthy, very very characterful, because we felt that in the media from the 70s that we were researching, that was how characters were. Things like Boys in the Black Stuff and Auf Wiedersehen Pet, we thought those were the sort of people we'd like to have on our rig.
Yeah. And is that kind of why you gravitated towards the 70s? That sense of kind of, it's almost like, as you say, a new frontier in that sense, and like a lot more dangerous even before you add in otherworldly elements.
Yeah, there's some really good practical reasons why we thought we'd do it in the past as well. Because in the modern day, like I say, safety standards are better. They always have a tender ship, many attendant ships that are nearby. They have GPS, they have satellite phones, they have all these kind of things that make it harder for a rig to fall out of contact. And if a rig did fall out of contact, people would be over there pretty sharpish. With our setting, we were able to put our characters in a slightly more isolated and dangerous position. So that's the practical reasons. And beyond that, I just think it's really wonderful to be able to experience a different time period. We've got a very small and shrinking number of people who actually experienced the 70s. So, I mean, I was born in 1977. So for me, there's no direct experience, although the echoes of that in interior design slightly came down the edges. So even in the 80s, you'd feel like brown sitting rooms and things. So I had that a little bit. But there were a couple of our directors who were familiar with the 70s, and that was some really funny conversations with them and our younger team members, with them explaining what it was like. You know, the fact that you picked up a phone and you turned a dial to make it ring. The fact that computers filled a room and were cost £500,000. It was a really interesting and fun way to make sure we didn't introduce anachronisms and create something that's really authentic, we hope.
Yeah, I mean, I've had enough conversations with people who are younger than me, like kind of about things that happened in the 90s and 2000s that they can't quite believe were real and stuff. So the 70s is just
Yeah.
adds a whole extra layer to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that was a continual thing, and there is good data out there. There are archive films transferred from cine movies. There are lots of company archives, which we were able to crawl on the web from oil companies, and even movies showing how some of those rigs were built, how the tension rigs were built, how the early rigs were built, some of the initial disasters, like the I think it's called the Ocean Explorer, or I can't remember exactly what it was called, but there was a rig which capsized. You could read the official accident reports about that and access schematics and things. That was really exciting. And beyond that, we actually got to speak to some real oil workers who had worked out in the North Sea, and they were able to give us their impressions of what it was like out there.
Oh, cool. That must have been very interesting, like helping kind of bring it all to life. And
Yeah, what we wanted to say is, we said to them, what did it sound like? What did it feel like? Both the isolation and the weather. And they said it was, if anyone who's been on a boat with its big diesel engines knows that they're always grinding away, and you always have that sense that everything's moving. On the rigs, apparently it was even more so than that, because you had big turbines driving the generators, you had the drill moving and being attached, so there's a cacophony always going on, and that was something that really helped us, our sound designers, to establish the kind of oral tapestry for the experience, and allowed us to play with the sense that the rig itself is alive. So perhaps in a sense similar to Solaris or Event Horizon, where there is some sense that there is a character of the rig and whatever comes aboard, that we could establish a kind of a presence of that. And then we could play things with, like, after things happen, the rig goes dead and the sounds die down, and you've just got the sound of the wind in the sea. And that's a super interesting place to go to for as an experience for our players to kind of enjoy that contrast in sound landscapes.
yeah, I mean, I suppose that's kind of brings us on to one of the like fundamentals. Obviously, if games is obviously sound design and music and that kind of thing. What was it like, kind of making it sound like like a 1970s oil rig? Was that like a huge challenge, or was that something that you were kind of quite easily prepared for?
Yeah, well, we had an extremely good sound department on Still Wakes Deep, led by our audio director Dan Hendricks. They worked tirelessly to create systems and create sounds that would encompass everything from the machinery and the sounds of the structure and the skeleton of the rig, right to the results, the horrific results of what happens on board. So they were recording everything from throwing spam cans, if you can believe it. Which, we populated the rig with 1970s icons that we could use to as things that the player can pick up. Although I should say corn, smoked meat and ham, or generic smoked meat and ham, not actual spam cans, of course. But certainly having those, throwing down on the floor and recording that as Foley, that was really great. Recording actual phones, recording underwater stuff, recording breathing. I mean, I could go on about our wonderful voice actors as well, but they built this up with systems like a resonance system. So when the rig shakes or trembles or creaks and groans, things you're near will resonate as well. So you'll get like a sheet of metal go chicka, 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 chicka next to you, and it's a lovely kind of enveloping feeling. And when you layer in all the sounds of the storm and the wind and the waves below, it's really really stunning, I think.
No, definitely. I think from everything that we've seen so far from Still Wakes of Deep, you can really get that sense of how detailed everything is, and you can
Yeah,
really see the effort that's been put behind it. Even like onto the social media side, where you put up all the narratives that were going on at the time in the news and stuff, and how in depth the history side of it all is.
yeah,
No, it's definitely been.
we love to get people interested in that, get them into the headspace. And when you're exploring the rig at the start, when you can walk around, maybe around the living quarters, and maybe explore things that are going on in there, you'll be able to read things and see things and hear things that are hopefully authentically 70s and will bring you into that mood, that time.
Yeah, it gives you that extra hook to wanting to go continue explore, but obviously you're in this
Yeah,
floating oil rig and you're like, I don't want to go in.
yeah,
So it's
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
we really, it's that wonderful thing in horror, isn't it? You want to drive the player forward because the player wants to experience the story that you've laid out for them. You want them to move forward and find new things and experience the story, but also you're also trying to scare them and say, look, if you move forward, you're going to be in danger. If you move forward, you're going to find bad things, and that tension is really tough sometimes. I think for people who are familiar and enjoy the delicious sense of terror that you get with a good horror experience, that's easier. But we want people to experience the whole story, and that's been so fun as designers and developers to try and balance that opposing force.
Yeah.
And just like kind of leading off from sound design as well, like music. Because when you're talking about like all the ambient sounds, that I'm imagining like it'd be quite easy for like a composer to like lean into a lot of that sort of almost like I forget what the right word is, but like the music that sounds like it's part of like the eeriness of like the environment and stuff.
See, yeah. Well, it's really interesting you say that. So we got our composer Jason Graves. He worked with a sculptor to create an instrument shaped like an oil rig. So it's this metal structure that is a bit like some of the instruments that were traditionally used to create horror sound effects. There's some that have been used in other games, but this is personal to us. And he played this rig by dragging violin bows down it, by hitting it, by creaking it and twisting it. And he took those sounds and slowed them down so that they sound like they're from a proper 100-foot tall real oil rig. And that it's so his soundtrack, Jason's soundtrack, is a mixture of these rig sounds being used as instruments that combined with traditional instruments to create this really complementary soundtrack that almost is like the rig making music for the game.
That sounds like absolutely incredible.
That's great. I hope we're always hoping that the rig will come over to us after the game and maybe sit in our reception area and
have pride of place this rig shaped instrument.
People can ping it on the way in for luck. Yeah.
And I was going to ask as well whether there's like any kind of more 70s style music alongside that you might expect, or is it all more just focused on the horror sounds of the soundtrack rather than kind of the time period?
There's nothing that I can tell you about yet, but one thing that we are really pleased by is that I found a transcript of a 70s shipping forecast, and we were able to get that. We altered it slightly, and we were able to get that read out, and that's a really lovely thing that I'm personally nerd out about. I used to listen to the radio a lot, and when you listen to the radio long enough, it gets to a time of day, especially if you listen to Radio 4, it goes into the shipping forecast at the end of the day, and then you get sailing by. And I think it's a very common British experience to be familiar with these strange places like Fair Isle, Viking, Biscay, and you think, where are these places? And to have someone reading those out, and I think it was a really evocative thing that we were able to put into the game.
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't think I've ever listened to the shipping forecast. The only thing, like, there's a part of the comedy show Black Books to do with the shipping forecast, which I probably shouldn't go into detail what happens with it, because it's to do with a female character like listening to it at bedtime because she likes the guy's voice. But anyway, that's kind of my main reference point for that. But yeah, so that's what, like, again, I love these like kind of attention to detail and all these like little points there as well, because it's a lot. It's a period that I think people have kind of vague, kind of sweeping impressions of if they've not lived through it. But like getting that kind of detail and authenticity is obviously going to ground the horror and everything a lot more.
Completely.
So is there much you can say about what we can expect in terms of the actual gameplay, like sort of once you're in control and kind of going through that?
Yeah, so I can tell you a few things. I can tell you especially about our inspirations for what we for where we started. One of the games that meant a lot to me when we were thinking about how to construct the rig was Prey, and the way that you gradually unlock that space station and move about it, and the very fact that it is it and its antecedent System Shock 2, which is probably my favorite game ever. It's I've completed it multiple times, love it to bits. I love that idea that you're on this island in the middle of an inhospitable environment that you gradually become familiar with. You gradually move through it and find new places and think, oh, wouldn't it be great when I get to that deck? Wouldn't it be great till I get to that place? And the same kind of thing you get from Dead Space or Alien Isolation, where you get told about a place early on in the game and think, oh wow, that sounds amazing. When I get to that? And so as we were researching the rigs, we were thinking, what are these places that sound the most cool, and what are the places that sound the most terrifying to visit, especially if you're in a position where maybe there's something on board, or in a position where the rig is in trouble and maybe the rig is starting to sink or tilt. And so we used those place names to start to build up a sequential nature to the gameplay, that you'd slowly move through the rig, and where we wanted to push it a bit further was to have an evolution in the rig as you move through it. So you will come back to the same places again and again, and they've been changed. Maybe they're now full of water because the rig has started to sink. Maybe they've transformed in some other way. I love that way that you go, oh my God, I'm back here, but it's so different and terrifying and scary, or at an angle which makes me think, oh wow, I thought I knew where I was, but I'm not, and that unsettles the player and unsettles you and makes you more nervous about where you're going. I can say it's a lot of trouble doing it that way. It certainly hasn't been easy. The main problem is if you've got a room that you use 3 times in 3 different configurations, if you want to change something about that room that's common to all those configurations, it can get really irritating trying to change it in all those things. So you might say, well, in the first version, when I come to this room, I want to, can we move that door a little bit because it's not quite in the right place? And then you have to go around and move the door in all the other places. And then you go, oh no, I can't move the door in the other place because that would mean the water ran out the door or something. So we can't change it. And figuring out all that stuff, it was probably the biggest level design challenge that we had when making Deep.
Yeah. Now, that was one thing I was going to mention. And we always ask everyone that we interview, what was the biggest challenge you've had so far with developing Still Wakes the Deep?
Yeah, I think that has probably been the biggest one. Just the understanding the scope of what we were trying to do, and matching that to our abilities as developers, and to understand what it was that we were making. Because often with games, there are a few games where you understand very early what it is you're making. But the more you focus on narrative rather than pure mechanics, and the more that the narrative has to support the arc of the game rather than the things you do, I think the harder it is to be sure that you're getting it right. And it's only when you can start to play the game, firstly, from end to end, secondly, with all the story cutscenes in, and thirdly, with really all the audio-visual things that you expect to have, because sound and vision is really important to horror.
Oh yeah.
I've seen many comedy skits about if you play a horror movie scene, but you put ridiculous music over it, it becomes funny.
Yeah.
It's not scary anymore. So playing a horror game without any music, playing it without audio, is a strange experience, because you think, well, am I getting the effect that I really want here? And with that as well, you get horror fatigue when you're developing a game, and this always happens with horror games. You see the same moment again and again and again. You experience it the first time, it might be, oh, that works, and then you see it again and again. You start second guessing yourself and thinking, is this still scary? Am I going to scare people with this? Are people going to react to this in the way that I expect? And the temptation is to still keep fiddling with it and changing it and enhancing it and removing things that you think are no longer any good. And that's where it's really important to have regular playtests, regular people playing the game. We've been lucky enough to have the Bloodlines 2 team on board to help us test the game. So we have a lovely thing set up at the Chinese room where we swap games every few weeks and playtest each other's games. So we playtest Bloodlines 2, they playtest Deep, and we get surveys together, and they record their gameplay, and we go, is this working? Oh, it actually is working. Or, oh my goodness, we realized that this gameplay mechanic is actually really something that we knew how to do because we've been playing with it for a year. But people who are new to the game, they're just not quite getting it because they don't see it in the way that we see it. And of course, we conduct external playtests as well. And any time anyone joins the studio, any time anyone's new, it's like fresh meat. We can grab. Say,
Amazing.
You've not played the game before. You're unsullied. You can play it, and we'll watch you play it and see what you do, and get the benefit of that. And we've had some great moments with that. We've had people who've recorded themselves play, and play experiences that we've become quite blasé about, and yet you watch them on their little webcam inset on the video, and I remember one person in particular, they were playing a scene and they just stopped the game, and I was like, oh no, what's happened? They got a technical problem, and they just went like this on the film. Just waited for it. then started playing again, and I thought, okay, well, that's working after all.
Yeah. Yeah, I
I'm
bet your
just
confidence
imagining.
went up there.
Yeah,
I'm just imagining someone's got like a reel somewhere, like every time like a new employee's coming, and he managed to like get them to like go, "Oh."
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, so I mean, on the kind of flip side of that question, like in terms of the challenge, what's been the most fun thing about making this, other than I will say because you've already mentioned throwing spam cans around and like weirdly shaped instruments. So, other than those two things, what's the most fun part of it?
The times when we felt, oh, this could really, really work, is when particular cutscenes, particular moments with the characters on the rig have gone in, which haven't failed to, which have on first viewing created such a positive, and when I say positive, I don't necessarily mean happy, emotional reaction um, from ourselves. And even if you get that, and even when we were just watching the voice actors outside in London through a little webcam, watching them act in a very boring looking studio, and yet the performances they're giving of the really good script that we've got, when that affects you emotionally, you think, actually, this is good. This is great. We've got a framework here that we can hang almost anything we want around it, and we can be confident that it tells a really compelling and emotional story.
It's good, and I bet that's like kind of like that really rewarding moment when you feel like, yeah, this is all coming together.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's also brilliant just watching people die, watching people fall off the rig, watching people being dismembered, or just having a terrifying moment is absolutely excellent. And some of the scenes we're happiest about, when the prototypes of those went in, you could again immediately see, yeah, this is going to work. Even in grey box, even in a fully lit level with no shadows at all, it's actually quite scary and really filled with tension and really filled with horror. We're confident this can work.
Yeah. Well, it's not horror without a little death and dismemberment. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so difficult to balance that, though, isn't it? You know, it's like we always wanted to make sure that we didn't teach the player things by killing them. I think that was really important to us. I don't think it. I think that's kind of bad in a way. I think there's certain games that it works really well, but for me, it spoils the story that I'm establishing as the player. It breaks the flow of the experience. It wrenches me out. We've got things about when he died that hopefully ease that transition. We did that consciously so that you don't get wrenched too far out the world. But if it turns from terror and horror and nervousness and tension into frustration, that's a failure. So we were always really wanted people to go, if they did die, people to go, yeah, fair play, I was messing about there. I did venture a little too far out of what looked like a safe area, and I can see why I died. Yeah, so we hope we've got that. We hope we got that balance right.
Yeah, definitely. I think just from the very little that we have seen from Still Wakes the Deep, it's been the community support behind the game has been amazing to see. How's it been feeling from that?
Yeah, we kind of came a little bit out of nowhere in some ways. We were quite surprised when we first were announced, and there were a lot of games in that reel, and the comments that we got on the streams afterwards, people were saying, "Oh wow, that looks interesting. I want to know more. That's a bit curious. What's going on there?" Because we consciously didn't show too much. We consciously didn't show too much of the gameplay. and of the story and the nature of what you find on the rig. So that when we saw those comments, we knew we'd pitched it right. We hope that as many people as possible on Game Pass, on PlayStation 5, on Steam, and the Epic Games Store pick it up because they want to find out what we've done.
Yeah, because I know from our point of view, it feels like they all like kind of merge into what it. I can't remember. Was it Summer Game Fest or the Game Awards where we saw that?
Yeah, I think it was a Summer Games Fest. I think it was. Yeah, I think you're right.
And we were kind of trying to pick out like what horror games are in there, and there's obviously not many pickings, but then all of a sudden, like Still Wakes the Deep comes up, and like, oh, hello, this is extremely interesting. So,
I mean, as a horror game myself, I have a kind of radar. I'm sure you do too. You keep an eye on Steam. You keep an eye on announcements. And there's a certain type of screenshot, a certain type of art that you go, "Ooh, what's that? Something new." And you just think, "Oh, great! I get to experience someone's horror game that they've created, and see the world through see through the eyes of the character and the world that they've created."
No, definitely. That's the biggest thing that we started the Horror Game Awards, was just because when we always see these showcases and awards and stuff, horror tends to get the back burner, and we get a very slim picking. So we thought, Phil's asked the question, like, why don't we do that? So it's been great to talk to so many different developers and see all these fantastic games that people put effort into. And we just want to showcase it to everyone, as many people as we can.
Glad you do it. I'm really glad you do it. Really appreciate being able to talk to you both.
Yep. So from kind of your end, is there anything much you can say about kind of what we can expect next in terms of news, or is that all still just kind of wait and see?
I think we've got more things coming through on TikTok, on Twitter, on various social media channels. We have upcoming events, but the main thing is we're never going to show too much. So you'll have to pick up the game to really understand what it is we've created.
Yeah. Just keep leading people like, oh, just a little bit further. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
No, well, it's been absolutely a pleasure talking about this. But before we kind of let you go and carry on planning different ways to scare both us and new recruits into the Chinese room, I've in the midst of all this, and obviously a very busy time, have you had much chance to play much in terms of other horror offerings from this year, or have there any games kind of come on your radar that you've kind of, even if you've not had a chance to play them, that you've thought, I need to get my hands on that at some point?
The most fun horror experience I've played recently was Lethal Company. I played it with my kids. I found it very amusing. Such a different game from Still Wakes Deep. It reminded me a bit of Dwarf Fortress in the way that it's fun to lose. It's fun for everything to go wrong. That's where the stories almost come from. It's funny that you die in certain ways, and it's testament to its power, its design, and its humor. That when you get killed, it's just actually funny, and you're not frustrating. And the sound of your teammate's voice suddenly cutting out as they die down a corridor, and you're thinking what just happened, is a simultaneous mix of humor and terror. So that's the last game I've been able to play because my kids badgered me to play it with me. And so yeah, that would be my pick for what I've been playing in the horror genre.
Nice. Well, a very good choice. That one. But yeah, thank you again very much. Obviously, for people who are watching this, we encourage you to check out Still Makes the Deep, and I keep forgetting to because we always say wishlist on Steam, but it can be wishlisted on PlayStation and Xbox, I believe.
Yeah.
I think because everyone seems to have a wish list these days. So
If you can do so.
Yeah.
Wish list it, yeah. And release date June the 18th on all platforms.
Yeah. So be sure to check it out, and obviously we'll have the links in the description of the video so you can wish list it and find out more information. And we may just have more as we come up to our monthly horror game showcases as well. Who knows? But yes, thank you very much again, and we'll look forward to seeing the game when it releases, and we'll catch everyone watching on the next one. All right.
Fantastic. Thanks both. Really a pleasure to join you.
This has been Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. Thank you very much for listening. Check out the links in the description for more info on where to follow our guests in order to support them and keep up to date with their work. The Horror Game Awards will be airing live on YouTube on Saturday 16th of December. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to avoid missing out on what promises to be a very exciting night of awards and game reveals, as well as future episodes of this podcast and other content. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.